Lamar Jackson apparently ruling himself out with a Twitter post on Thursday afternoon, and the Bengals still have to beat a Baltimore team. We'll break down what they have to do to advance through the wild card round.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Liscow. He's your host, James Rapien. It's Super Wild Card Weekend, which is a thing I'm never going to be able to say
super
with a
duper
straight face as we bring you another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Today brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs that they'll help you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. You can post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We're free and available everywhere you get your podcast and on YouTube. So gear up for the playoff run with a subscription on YouTube, with a follow anywhere you listen to your podcast, and we'll be there with you every step of the way this postseason. And James, one thing that occurs to me before we dive into this game in full is the playoffs were always the expectation this year, right? The expectations we talked about at the beginning of this year, we probably should have talked about this earlier in the week, was that the Bengals would be in contention for the 1 seed, and they were. They didn't quite get there, but they were in contention down to the end. And it's kind of ho-hum. They met expectations. We haven't taken a huge beat to celebrate that, oh, yeah, they made it to the playoffs. They've done it. You know, we talked about their celebration of winning the AFC North 2 years in a row. That was kind of the expectation, right? For us, for them. And business as usual is really, for me, what it feels like right now. They obviously have to win this game. And the playoff vibes probably hit on Sunday Night Football. But to me, it's, okay, they've met expectations. Let's go take care of business before things really heat up.
I was asked earlier this week, would it be a disappointment? And what do they have to do to avoid calling it a disappointing season? And I think that this is the stage, right? 12-4, win the division. You certainly have cemented yourself as one of the top teams in the AFC. So win this round. And then after that, will it be disappointing if they go down? Of course. But that's much different than losing to a team that's not going to have Lamar Jackson, like you mentioned, losing to a team that you clearly have more talent than. And so whether, they could beat Buffalo, they could also lose to Buffalo next week. And I'm assuming they're going to play the Bills. Maybe something crazy happens. Never say never. But that won't be the letdown that this would be. So much like last year, and there's a difference, the 31 years and everything that goes into that. I think some of those guys in the locker room felt that, by the way. I don't think everybody did. I don't think Joe Burrow felt that. I don't think he cared, paid attention, nothing. And you remember after they beat the Raiders, he was like, this is our standard. That's it, on to the next one. And it was just kind of like, and Sam Hubbard talked about that. Like he didn't really, Sam knew the impact of things and what that meant. And I don't think, and he didn't think Joe Burrow did, and I don't either. But going into this game, I think it's similar in a sense that you're kind of expected to win, much like you were expected to beat the Raiders. And honestly, this Ravens defense is much better, I think, than that Raiders defense, but they had some good pass rushers last year and a better quarterback than you're going to be facing on Sunday. So it's an interesting matchup for sure. But for me, my expectation is you have to win this game. And after you do that, then we can kind of reevaluate things. But regardless of everything that's gone on, if you don't win this game, it's going to feel like a big disappointment. Now, if you do win it, all bets are off because I think you have as good of a chance as anyone to keep moving and advancing in the postseason.
Yeah, and we'll obviously cross that bridge when we get there. But I agree with you that this game certainly feels like a game they should take care of business. And obviously they are taking the game very seriously. This is the third time they've seen Baltimore this year. The players have been asked about and talked at length about the challenges and advantages, which really cut both ways. Both teams get those challenges and advantages of playing a team for the third time in a season, of playing the team back-to-back weeks at home. And so the game itself could be a challenge. We've heard many analysts this week, at least I have, James, talk about how this Baltimore defense is so good and presents all these challenges, and Roquan Smith does all these things that make it hard for the Bengals to beat two high shells and palms and cover two palms, which is a kind of trap coverage, or man match quarters, or zone match quarters, whatever match quarters the Ravens are going to play a lot of this weekend. Roquan Smith out there covering all this ground, taking away the middle of the field and all this stuff. But despite all that, it's still the Bengals are favored by what? Like 9.5 at the time we record this.
9.5. Yep.
And you were looking at like the 2-game parlay of Bengals Bills money line is, and it's like it comes out to like -300 or -350 or something.
Yeah. So if you wager $10 right now at BetOnline for the Bengals and the Bills just to win straight up and parlay it together, saying both are going to happen, $10 gets you a whole $3.66. So when I assume Buffalo next week, well, a lot of people are assuming that they're -850 to win straight up. The Bengals -450. So not as favored, but certainly favored. And I get it. I understand it. And that's why going into a playoff game, the first 30 years of my life, by the way, I hadn't seen a Bengals playoff win, right? And going into this year now, it's like, well, yeah, they should win this game Sunday. Now, it doesn't mean they will. And there's a path for them to lose it. Of course, it's the NFL, just like there's a path for the Bills to lose to Miami. But that doesn't change expectations or my expectations for them in this matchup. And so that part goes hand in hand. But you're right. I was like, oh, yeah, what would Bills Bengals be? Just kind of curious. It doesn't get you much money, Jake, not unless you maybe go with the points, which is a completely different wager, completely different story.
And we don't talk a whole lot about sports gambling on this show. It's not my favorite kind of content, but what the markets tell us about what they expect to happen is sometimes interesting. And generally speaking, when you do a 2-game parlay, you're usually not looking at negative odds. You're usually going to get plus something, meaning if you bet $10, you're going to get more than $10 back. The fact that you only get $3.66 back or whatever the number is, the much smaller number than the number you wager, means that those two things, even together, are heavily favored to occur.
$10 if you bet the Ravens and the Dolphins to both win and parlay those together, $10 gets you 318.
Tells you how. I mean, that's like plus 3,180.
They're right? Saying that's not happening. That's what they're saying. Is that child, please? That's not happening. That's what BetOnline's telling you.
Incredibly unlikely there. So Lamar Jackson not playing in this game, as we discussed. Tyler Huntley throwing again for the Ravens on Thursday. We've kind of expected that it would be him. We talked to Kevin on the crossover episode yesterday. He might prefer it to be Anthony Brown instead of Tyler Huntley.
Not going to happen, Kevin. Sorry.
It seems pretty unlikely, right? I mean, Anthony Brown turns the ball over 3 times by himself. One of which isn't entirely his fault, but
he could come in and just throw it out to Jesse Bates if he wants to.
He didn't deal with pressure all that well. He made some mistakes that led to some turnovers that hurt his team in that game, let's say. But all that being said, and I talked a little bit about it because I watched Marvin Lewis and Mike Zimmer talk about this game today, and I listened to Derek Klass and Amina Kimes preview the game, and I listened to Steve Palazzolo and Sam Monson preview the game. So I listened to a bunch of people preview the game before we're recording this episode, James, and a lot of people are giving the Ravens defense, and I think rightfully so, a lot of credit. T. Higgins, the big news for the Bengals, a full go at practice on Thursday as well, returning from his illness, was surrounded by reporters out of his locker room, was asked about 5 different times how he was feeling. At one point was asked directly about the hip, said he's feeling good. Said he at 20 miles per hour was full speed at practice today. You asked him a great follow-up. What's the fastest speed he's hit all year? 22 miles per hour. And that's the great content you get from James over at Cincinnati Bengals Talk. In there doing his thing daily. I'm out there, man. I'm listening today. I'm listening to what my fingers on the pulse.
Yeah, you
That's
are.
Right.
Ooh.
So that being said, let's get into this game a little bit more and talk about some of the matchups that are going to matter in just a minute. Today's episode of Locked On Bengals is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. As a small business owner or hiring manager, you know that success in 2023 all depends on the team members you surround yourself with. And I'm sure Joe Burrow would agree the way he talks up his teammates and buys his offensive line cruises for the holidays. And that's why LinkedIn Jobs is there to help you hire the qualified candidates more efficiently by matching open roles with people who have the skills, values, and experiences to help you achieve your goals. LinkedIn Jobs helps you quickly attract qualified candidates to your open jobs with targeting tools that go beyond resume data, using insights from your job post and company and their 875 million member profiles to put your post in front of the most qualified candidates. LinkedIn Jobs makes it easy to screen and rate applicants based on the job qualifications that you publish, all in one platform. So you can check it out. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. You can post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply.
And now I have to tell you about Built Bar, the #1 protein bar on the planet. You know how much I love Built Bars if you've listened to this show. And if you haven't and you're new, well, welcome. Thanks for listening. And remember always that Built Bars are the #1 protein bar on the planet. High in protein, low in sugar, low in calories. And that chocolate I mentioned, well, they're covered in, it's covered in 100% real chocolate. This isn't fake chocolate. It's real chocolate with a great source of protein, low in sugar, low in calories, like I mentioned. And the best part is probably the flavors. They have something for everyone. Peanut butter brownie, coconut almond, churro, mint brownie, so many different options for you. And yeah, you can check them out at built.com like we've told you to do for years and years now here on Locked On Bengals, or your local Walmart. They're going to have them there too. So you can check them out at local Walmart or Sam's Club as well. So don't delay. Get the #1 protein bar on the planet, Built Bars, at Walmart, Sam's Club, and built.com.
To me, James, the way the Bengals could possibly lose this game is that something has gone horribly wrong and week 1 happens again. With the quarterback playing for the Baltimore Ravens, with the defense playing for the Baltimore Ravens, it's similar in terms of the script you would look for if you're looking for a way for the Baltimore Ravens to win. On the other side of things, if you're looking for a way for the Bengals to win, what are the things we've talked about this week? You're expecting Joe Burrow in this offense to play better than they did in week 18. You're potentially worried about the right side of the offensive line, right? And that's a matchup you're watching. Those guys need to hold up okay. And honestly, you're looking at the defense where the Ravens on offense haven't been able to get anything going since they lost Lamar Jackson to injury. And the one strength of this offense outside of Mark Andrews, the running game, that's something the Bengals have to contend with. DJ Reader and the company and the front seven have to deal with that. But, a guy that I've talked to, I've gone on his podcast, Ken McCusick, who does Baltimore Film Breakdown, went through and did his grading of the Baltimore offensive line last week. And I know Kevin Zeitler wasn't playing, but Morgan Moses, Ronnie Stanley, both had some of their worst games of the season against the Bengals last week. Sam Hubbard, Trey Hendrickson, Joseph Osai, Cam Sample, all those guys giving the Ravens tackles problems. DJ Reader, Tyler Linderbaum could be a fun matchup again. Kevin Zeitler coming back. Of course, he's a good player in there. Ben Powers having one of his worst games of the season, according to Ken's grading. So these are all areas where you're looking at last week and extrapolating, thinking like, okay, here's reasons to think the Bengals can control this game. But they have to avoid the week 1 weird scenario where they're turning the ball over a ton. They're not playing clean football. They're missing kicks. You're losing your long snapper. You're getting unlucky in some ways. And they're very equipped, I think, to take care of business this weekend.
For sure. What does Baltimore want to do? They want to run the ball. Well, look, whoever called out DJ Reader on Twitter, man, good luck. I mean, Tyler Linderbaum, loved him in the draft, right? And I think he's played pretty well this year overall. And got DJ some last week. Okay. We know what DJ is, right? Like we have a long history of what DJ Reader is. And so I expect him to play at a really, really high level, especially because the way it lines up, this is kind of the DJ Reader game. Not that he can't have an impact against the Chiefs or Bills or insert whoever, Chargers or Jaguars. I'm just saying from a run first offensive standpoint, this is probably the only team. I guess you could say the Chargers too, if you end up seeing them. But odds are that this is the game where you want him to really shut things down. And I think he's going to. This front, they've seen the Ravens. Last week was weird. I've tried to really hammer that home because I've been to a lot of games, obviously playoff games last year and, preseason games. Last week felt more like a preseason game than it did a playoff game. And they got out of there with a win. And that's all they needed to do. I think that this, much like the Bills game, for example, before the game, what did that feel like? It felt like a playoff game. I think that's how this is going to feel. And so I expect the Bengals defense to really come in and show the Ravens that, yeah, you might have Mark Andrews back and J.K. Dobbins. He's not going to run for 10 yards on his first carry. Which Ravens running back did that? I mean, the first carry of the game.
I assume Gus Edwards.
Yeah.
It was limited, by the way, on Thursday and is on the fast track, perhaps back from his concussion.
Yeah. And so if he's back, no, that's awesome. But good for him. Shouldn't matter. You shouldn't get 10 yards on your first carry. And I don't expect that. So that's a huge part of this. And really outside of Mark Andrews, and I downplay their weapons a little bit, but on our crossover show, but Isaiah Likely, he's good, but am I supposed to say like Isaiah Likely would be like 7th or 8th on the amount of on the weapons list next week if you end up playing the Bills, right? And so this week he's like 3rd or 4th. Find a way to make sure that he doesn't make huge plays.
He might be 2nd this week,
or which maybe, right? But I don't know. But
and he might be like 4th for Buffalo.
He's
Stephon
higher
Diggs,
than
Josh Allen. Anyway,
he's higher than you want him to be. Is my point in this Ravens offense right now. I expect this defense to shut things down, and it's going to be tough. It's not going to be super easy. Of course not. There's going to be wrinkles and new things. And heck, Greg Roman, you know what Greg Roman's doing? He's auditioning for his next job because I don't think he returns next year, and he knows that. So we'll see what he brings to the table. But I expect Lou Anarumo to be able to – maybe they bend a little early, right? Because if you face this Ravens team and it's Tyler Huntley, you've played him 3 times, and it's 3 different starting quarterbacks. That's pretty unique. But overall, this defense, I think they're up to the task, and I expect them to hold the Ravens certainly under 20. This Ravens team is averaging around 13 without Lamar Jackson. They had 16 last week, and it is the playoffs. Some odd things happen. So I think they'll be under 20 again this week. We'll see, but that's really my expectation for this defense.
Yeah, it's a good defense. And Tyler Huntley this year hasn't been a very good quarterback for the most part. He's turning the ball over, and that was a huge factor, obviously, when these teams played in Week 18. And if you can turn the Baltimore Ravens offense over again, it becomes harder to see their path to victory, right? Like if you're the Bengals, you would like to get out to an early lead in this game, as we always discuss. You would like to run in the second half to finish the game and kind of take care of business. The Ravens do have a really good defense, though. And Roquan Smith, for all of his antics or however worked up, folks want to get about what he did, and he did some things that weren't cool. Really good football player who does change the way the Ravens play defense a little bit. And, if he's entirely responsible for the reason that the Ravens defense has been so good lately, I don't know. But, I don't think they saw the full complement of what the Bengals want to do on offense last week. Mm-hmm. We talked with Mike about that. So if you're curious about, how the Bengals held back or whether they hid things, you can go check out that episode. That's a couple episodes back, released on Tuesday night. And I think they'll have a different team. The Ravens will obviously be a different team this week. The return of Mark Andrews, multiple tight ends. The Bengals will have to figure out how to deal with that. They'd like to use Trey Flowers against one tight end. They'll have to figure out what they want to do. If the Ravens go 2-3 tight ends, and if that's an extra safety with Dax Hill and Trey Flowers on the field in some packages, we'll see what they choose to do there. I think they ended up going to Mike Hilton on Isaiah likely a few times in that game too, despite the size difference there. So we'll see what they do there. But it's interesting how much the Bengals are favored by in a game that could not necessarily will be, but could be a defensive struggle. And I have a question for you, James, that I'll ask you in just a minute.
But first, a word from BetOnline. BetOnline is your number one source for all things sports betting info, stats, news, analysis, and if you want to wager on the Bengals to win, or maybe you want to put a good old-fashioned parlay together where it's maybe Bengals, maybe it's Bills, maybe it's I don't know. I like the idea of a Jags Bucks parlay. That could be interesting too because they're both underdogs. Both home underdogs, by the way. Point is you have plenty of options with BetOnline, and it's not just NFL. It is NBA. It is college hoops. It is all things sports wagering. So make sure you check them out today. Sign up for free and start wagering at BetOnline. They are the best at this, and I've used them for quite some time, and you should too. BetOnline, where the game starts.
My question for you, James, is the Bengals 9.5 point favorites, and they're what we said minus 450.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Yep.
Facing a very similar scenario to what the Bills are facing. The Bills are, in the double digits, but they're minus
13 and a half. 13 and a half.
So a 4 point difference, but they're minus like 850, was it?
Mm-hmm. Yep. To win straight up.
What's the difference? Like, I'm pulling a Bengals here a little bit, and I'm looking for that motivation. But why, I guess, is there this feeling that this game is going to be close and that the Ravens could somehow win this game and pull the upset when they've lost to some pretty bad teams down the stretch with roughly the team they're going to be fielding this weekend? And the Bengals have won 8 in a row against some pretty good teams in that mix. So where's that? What am I missing? Why is this game suddenly closer than what the results would indicate in the last half of the season?
I think the Tyler Huntley-led Ravens would kick the snot out of the Skylar Thompson-led Miami Dolphins because this defense for the Ravens, and that's how we can – it's perfect. It's a perfect way to segue into this defense a little bit. But I think they're legit, and I think they're the best defense this Bengals – and I'm going to keep hammering this home. Best defense they're going to face on this side of the playoff bracket.
I'm not even sure that's true, to be honest. It might be, but I think
people are going to say that
good defense too.
They have 0 corners. They have their best corners coming off of an ACL. Kyer Elam has not been what they needed him to be.
White's playing better though, and Micah Hyde's coming back.
Man, he grabbed Jamar Chase with 4 hands on the first play of the game. The first play.
Yeah, that'd be like 3 weeks ago by the time they play again.
Sure. And so maybe he'll be better than that. But I would take Marlon Humphrey right now over Tre'Davious White. And so it's close, but I think that this defense and the thing is Roquan Smith is a beast. He was annoying last week and he was playing weird. I haven't seen that before, but everyone knows ever since he got drafted, he was an awesome player. And that's why the Ravens traded for him. And he's just another piece that you're going to have to be on the lookout for. And so, yeah, I think this Ravens defense, do they have the star edge rusher? No, they don't. That some of these other teams have, but I just think they're a really solid unit. So I think that's the difference. I think the Dolphins would score like 6 points against this Ravens defense. And they just, maybe not. Maybe Skylar Thompson, it gets more comfortable and Mike McDaniel gets all creative and cute and finds a way. I think they would have probably had a shot with Tua, by the way. Like, I think that's how big of a drop it is. No Tua, who I think is like a league average quarterback. And it's just really, really tough to see a path for Miami to win, even though it is a divisional matchup. Tougher for me. And I also don't think that like the Bills, their margin for error, they could have 4 turnovers and still beat Miami. Mm-hmm. I don't know if the Bengals would be able to do that. Maybe, right? Maybe, but I don't know if they'd be able to do that on Sunday night. And hopefully we don't have to find out because that just sounds like a headache that nobody wants to deal with, to be honest.
I think you make a lot of good points there. The point I'm trying to make is that there's this, and maybe this is just getting under my skin today because I saw some ill-informed takes that aren't considering how good Joe Burrow is. And the continued like doubt and skepticism around Joe Burrow, like early this season and last season, it was he's never going to be able to beat cover 2. And now it's, Roquan Smith is the answer for Joe Burrow. And Joe Burrow can't beat a linebacker.
Oh,
and
all right, there we go. Perfect. Let's do this. If my money's on Burrow figuring out this defense versus McDonald, the new Ravens defensive coordinator, continuing to have Burrow's number, like no doubt. And again, I think that matchup last week was just weird. And so expectations are high for Burrow in this offense. And if they do play pretty well against this defense, that's more the encouraging part, because they only had the one turnover last week. As bad as they played and as ugly as it was, they only had the one turnover, and they shouldn't have even had that. It was BS. So the other part of this, and I'm not going to do it after the game unless it's really bad. I want the officials across the league to please. I mean, there was a face mask on Watson that was ridiculous that didn't get called. There was the face mask on Burrow that was ridiculous and didn't get called. There were so many fans on Twitter complaining. And a lot of it from the videos I saw afterwards across the league there was a legitimate beef to it. So I hope that this weekend, this entire playoff weekend has nothing to do with the officiating. And there's always going to be a call that's debated, but it can be a call. It doesn't have to be all of the calls. And last week it felt like it was all of the calls.
I'll just throw this out.
Lack of calls.
The thing for me for the Bengals on offense this week that also needs to be better is they just need to play better in the trenches. Yeah. The Ravens aren't world beaters up front, but they have good depth for what they've got. They've got a lot of pieces that they rotate in there. Their interior defensive linemen, Justin Madubuike and Travis Jones, are both, and Calais Campbell, of course, are all really good players. So can you figure out a way to run the ball a little bit when you get these too high looks, because the Ravens are going to be living in too high? Can you punish them for it like you've been able to do this year? Can you find a quick game? Because if they're playing too high safeties, and you saw some of this from the Bengals last week, you can get Roquan Smith isolated on receivers. We saw, if you go back and watch the tape, you see Roquan Smith isolated on Jamar Chase, Roquan Smith isolated on Tyler Boyd and on T. Higgins on different snaps in that game. So if you can take advantage of some of that stuff and, pick on Roquan Smith a little bit, even though he is a piece that really does make the lives easier for a lot of the others on the Ravens defense, if you can isolate him on one of your really good wide receivers, especially Jamar Chase, I'm thinking about, well, I think you like that matchup if you're the Bengals, because as fast and as athletic as Roquan is, if you can take advantage of that, great, but you need to block a little bit better, right? You need to hold up a little bit better, especially in the run game, I think. And so those are going to be some things I'm watching this weekend with Madubuike and Travis Jones, both, really, really strong performances. The other note that I was going to hit really quick, and I'm not going to get into this because I hate that I even know this, is that I looked into the officials. I don't think I've talked about this on the show yet, James.
You haven't.
And they've got the most home team friendly officiating crew in the 2022 season officiating this game. They haven't seen it. I think it's Clay. I don't remember his last name. His first name is Clay. And his crew this year, I think the gap between penalties called on the home team, penalties called on the away team is like 40. It's the biggest gap in the NFL. The Bengals haven't seen him in a long time. I think it's 2019 is the last time the Bengals saw him. He reffed a Ravens-Jets game this year when the Ravens were on the road, called 10 penalties on the Ravens in that game. 3, I believe, on the Jets, who were the home team. So I'm hoping for a well-officiated game. And I'm just throwing that out there because maybe some fans will enjoy the factoid. But is your prediction still the same as it was in the crossover, James?
Yeah, it is 26-19. Part of it is, it's like, 19 points. Well, when you have Justin Tucker, you can score from almost anywhere.
Well, they haven't.
And that's part of it. No, I agree. They haven't. I think there'll be a wrinkle or two, but you score a touchdown, you have 4 field goals, 19 happens pretty quick. And flip side, I think this Bengals offense is going to come out and play pretty well. I expect Jamar Chase, and he was pretty decent the other day, but I expect him to have a really good game. And that doesn't mean the numbers are going to be awesome. I don't mean that. I'm not saying 200 yards or anything like that. Not that he couldn't do that. But I think when we sit down to do our next show, there's going to be a play or two where we're like, in Jamar. Ooh, and I'm going to be doing something like that. So we'll see. But I expect Jamar Chase to get the last laugh with Roquan Smith. And this is a really good way for Jamar to let the league know that, okay, you want to take little physical shots with me and all of those things, that's fine. This is what's going to happen to you. And I think that's what's going to happen. I think he's going to have a big game and have a couple big plays. And who knows? I'm not saying he's going to run over Roquan Smith or something, but he could certainly run by him. And there aren't many guys that could keep up with Jamar. And I think he's going to be poised to have a big game. And speaking of big games, Joe Burrow, he's going to be pretty locked in. And see, as I say all these things, I'm like, well, if these things happen, it won't be 26-19. So I'll stick with my score prediction, but won't be shocked if it's worse. Last thing for me, Jake, and I checked to make sure, with a win on Sunday, and this is so weird to say, it'll be the first time in Bengals history that they've won a playoff game in back-to-back seasons.
It's crazy. They can break quite a few streaks. Their record on Sunday Night Football, not so great either historically. I don't think any of that matters. It's the reason we haven't really talked about it this week. And this team in particular has been great at breaking streaks. So why not do another one? TJ Hushmanzada, ruler of the jungle, I believe.
Yep.
On Sunday night. That should be fun.
Chad Johnson going to be in the crowd, has his ticket.
I don't know why they wouldn't just pull Chad up on the throne with TJ, given the dynamic duo.
I don't know why the Ravens haven't called TJ and Chad to both start, because I'm not. Yeah. The thing is you think I'm kidding.
You are.
We're gonna do this. You telling me Chad isn't better than James Prochet?
I mean, he's like 30 years older.
He's 45. You seen Chad?
Yeah,
I saw him. I saw him on Thursday Night Football. Chad could still slice and dice him up.
Look, man, I have the utmost respect for Chad Johnson, and saying this probably precludes, if he ever sees it, the possibility of him ever coming to talk to us. But you know what? I'm not even going to say it. I love Chad.
No, because he would go off. Well, he would go off if he was catching passes from Joe Burrow. Put it that way.
Love Chad Johnson. Chad Ochocinco. Hope that motivating factor is really fun. Looking forward to seeing the
always open, like Burrow's title window.
Looking forward to seeing the scenes from Cincinnati on Sunday night. Looks like it's going to be a great show. So if you're going to the game, enjoy that. And we'll be back with you after the game in the wee hours Eastern time. And until next time, Bengals fans, hooday, and have a good one.